Oh, there it is. Hello, good evening, and thank you for coming tonight to our community forum, Canada's Law and Order Agenda, Tough on Crime. This is the first forum that we've had in Regina. This is the third forum Elizabeth Fry Society has had, but our first time in the Queen City, so we're excited to be here. So thank you for coming out tonight, and thank you for the panelists for coming out tonight, and Elder Agnes Littleton, thank you for coming tonight. Thanks to the University of Regina, and in particular the Social Policy Research Unit, Dr. Ailsa Watkinson, Fiona Douglas, Merle Mills, and Rick Favel from First Nations University of Canada for helping to arrange and host our first Regina Community Forum. My name's Caroline Wright, Executive Director of Elizabeth Fry, Saskatchewan. I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging and thanking the peoples of Treaty 4 territory upon whose traditional lands we are holding this forum tonight. We'll open with a prayer brought by Elder Agnes Littleton. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here to say a prayer for every one of us. Everything to turn out right, to stand strong, to help one another, to understand one another. I will say a prayer in my own language. That's the only way I could. I was brought up that way, to pray in my own language from small till I'm 71 years old now. And I go to lots of places and invited lots of places to say a prayer. So I will say a prayer for us tonight. Everything will turn out right for us. We'll all stand together strong and believe in our cultures. Mamutawi maogag siwatsin. Gagis mudetata nusuka kabni dipskak. Esimi asikanima. Kabndetamaya. Mamuka puya kakio. Kansituhtatuya. Minan beki timagina winan pesawe minan kan situtatuya kamamu kapuya ksemandu except maisi tamawinan niwek mam stoaga niwek iwitaka maya ikeki mai kawi wawi tu kawi minan akiwitaka maya ya kabmi miose tamawinan anima kawi mi atutahigoki kawi mtasihtakik and meis mi asini kan de tamatik except my seat among semantu mam tawi mau kitmaginawana semantu school semantu gusan kawi noski newek mam stoaga newek kagi semudata yung kanwa patis tamawinan kusan meisi kamutikek kam mamu ka pautsik kan situhtatusik isimi asini except my seat tamawinan Ominaste mga mi kawiyan kay twist mag. Ikusip maisi kamay twist mag punan. Ikusip maisi tamawinan. Min gagis mo tatawa. Niwek mamstoaga niwek ikusan maisi. Utakap mamuka kap mamu apisiguri. Kami asinig. Kami gawiyati gwita kamamu ka puisik. Gagis mo tatatak sisi. Asnabe inuitams kami kapmain, kiso may guteki may kusin, kay kapmi maminas tamawin, nikagisimuin, ukagisimuok. Ikusip may si tamawin, makisip ako simot, semmoisen kuunnelta kapmaat. Ei tahtu ainakaan sit naisiinu, ei tahtu naisiinu. Mä mun kapuja isimioasikin, kun saan meisi. Aho.
Thank you, Elder Littleton. Tonight we have a number of things to talk about. I'm going to spend just a moment talking about Elizabeth Fry and how the evening is going to go. With respect and compassion, the Elizabeth Fry Society of Saskatchewan advocates for the freedom of criminalized women through the provision of programs, supports, and services. We strive for solutions to meet the needs of individual women in overcoming systemic barriers, including poverty, violence, and discrimination that can lead to criminalized behavior. Elizabeth Fry Society and other justice-seeking organizations and individuals are deeply concerned over the escalation of criminalization of marginalized people, particularly the increased criminalization of women and girls and those with mental health challenges. Women are the fastest growing prison population globally, and in Saskatchewan, it is our Aboriginal women and men that populate our prisons. Estimates are 85% and growing. The increase in criminalized women is undoubtedly linked to the evisceration of social services for women and children, and also linked to the legacy of colonization. There is pressure nationally and globally to seek a law and order approach to social issues, to seek out legal solutions to social problems. There have been a number of changes to criminal legislation over the last two sessions of Parliament, conditional releases, and proposed changes to Youth Criminal Justice Act, gang legislation, drug legislation with more mandatory and more severe sentences. The changes are being touted as deterrents, claiming more punitive measures will make our communities safer. But does that approach really work? Everyone would like to feel safe. We all want healthy, safe communities. We acknowledge the very real pain and feel compassion for those whose lives have been changed by a criminal act. Does putting more people in jail for longer periods of time really deter crime and avoid tragedy? The question posed tonight is, how do we really achieve healthy and safe communities? Tonight we invite you to have a courageous conversation about increasing criminalization and what that means to those that are incarcerated, to our communities, and to you individually. Tonight we'll be talking about a number of issues and realities, including the perception of crime versus the reality of crime, the social construction of crime, who is becoming criminalized, the cost of prisons, and the loss of human potential, the ever-increasing criminalization of marginalized people, Aboriginal people, women, and those with disabilities and mental health challenges. Prisons have become an inevitability. They are taken for granted because in one form or another, they seem to have always existed. Today, we will explore with you alternatives and other possibilities of developing safe communities. Elizabeth Fry Society is an abolitionist society. What does that mean? Can you imagine a world without prisons? What do our communities look like when prisons aren't necessary? Please try and hold that vision in your mind tonight while the panelists present. And during the second half of the evening, you get to voice what you think should happen to suggest ways forward from this evening to create a community where prisons are not necessary, a world where prisons are not inevitable. In a moment, I'll be introducing the panel. Each member will have approximately 10 to 15 minutes to speak. And after the panel is done, we'll be asking for your participation. We will be circulating or have out a sign-up sheet if you're interested in receiving more information from this tonight or in the future around similar issues. Please put your name and email on that and we'll get some information to you. We hope to inform each other tonight and to stimulate new ideas, new ways forward, perhaps identify some new approaches and alternative solutions and next steps. I just have a few things to set the groundwork, a few bits of information that we thought we would set out before the panel starts going. if you'll bear with me. Recent statistics on crime rates for Canada show that the rates as of 2006 are at the lowest since 1981. Homicide rates are considered the most egregious of crimes. In 2007, saw a 3% decrease in homicide rates, the second consecutive decrease, which has continued to decline since its peak in 1975. So those are quite different sorts of statements than we generally think about when we hear about crime. Often people have the perception that it's on the increase. Canada's incarceration rate of 129 per 100,000 is among the highest in the so-called Western democracies. Worldwide, the United States has the highest rate of 769 per 100,000, while Scotland is 119, Germany is 96, France 88, Austria 86, and Norway is 57. Saskatchewan's incarceration rate is 181 per 100,000, and British Columbia it is 76 per 100,000. So we tend to incarcerate a lot of people in Saskatchewan. Aboriginal adults are incarcerated 35 times the rate of non-Aboriginal people. In Saskatchewan, 87% of provincial women prisoners are Aboriginal women, the highest rate across the country. According to the statistics, Saskatchewan population is made up of 10% Aboriginal women, which compares to British Columbia, yet the incarceration for Aboriginal women in BC is 29%. The Western provinces have the highest crime rate, with Saskatchewan leading the way with approximately 13,000 offenses per 100,000 in 2007. In 2007, the Canadian average was 6,984 per 100,000. In 2004-05 and 05-06, 3 years after the implementation of the Youth Criminal Justice Act, there was an 18% decline in youth being admitted into custody. So there's a number of statements like that, and we'll be hearing more of them tonight. But right now, I think we will get to our panelists and let them begin. I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then they'll each speak, and then we'll take a short break, and when we get back, we'll be open for questions from you and hopefully have a good conversation. Hirsch Greenberg is our first panelist. Hirsch has a Master's of Social Work from the University of Regina. He's had 30 years of work in the human services, 30 years of community-based organizations, both as staff and as volunteer on boards and other. Hirsch serves as a board member of RAMP, Regina Alternative Measures Program. He is involved with the Regina Homeless Committee. He's involved in the Peacekeeping Circle at Albert Community School. He is the practicum coordinator of the Department of Justice Studies Human Justice Program here at the University of Regina. Hirsch received a major grant for homelessness, partnering strategy, and HIFAS, and he is married and is the father of 2 adult children and has longtime companions of a dog and a cat. So that's Hirsch. Our next speaker is Bonnie Morton. Bonnie has worked as an anti-poverty advocate and minister for the past 2 decades with Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry, formerly the Downtown Chaplaincy of Wascana Presbyteria of United Church of Canada. In the past, she served as the president of the National Anti-Poverty Organization. Bonnie is currently the chairperson of the Charter Committee on Poverty Issues, the chair of the Equality Advisory Committee of the Court Challenges Program, and sits on the board of Court Challenges Program. She has received the Keith Corse Award for Social Justice Work, the YWCA Women of Distinction Award, and International Helen Prize for Humanitarian Service, the Saskatchewan Centennial Medal, and most recently, the Elizabeth Fry Rebel with a Cause Award. All of these awards have recognized Bonnie for her work in the area of social and economic justice. In May 2006, Bonnie was an invited presenter to the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Committee of the United Nations. Bonnie is currently a master's student in the Department of Justice Studies, University of Regina. Dr. Ailsa Watkinson was the president of the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies, or CAFES, for 5 years. She is currently the past president of CAFES and a 15-year member of the Saskatchewan Elizabeth Fry Board. She is a professor with the Faculty of Social Work, University of Regina, located at the Saskatchewan campus. Ailsa's education, research, and work experience is focused on human rights. She has published a number of journal articles on such topics as child abuse, corporal punishment, sexual harassment, employment equity, the Charter as policy advocate, globalization, religion in public spaces, and administration of equality rights. So that is Ailsa. Ashley Longmore is a community justice facilitator at Regina Alternative Measures Program, a RAMP. She's a recent graduate of the University of Regina and with a human justice degree. So she joins us tonight as a young, new person with new ideas and new ways to do things. Jason Smith is also with RAMP. He is a Status Cree First Nations person from Muscatee, First Nations in the Prince Albert area. He is part of the Help Eliminate Auto Theft program, or HEAT, working out of Regina Alternative Measures. He's a graduate of the U of S with a 4-year degree in Sociology and Aboriginal Justice and Criminology program. He was a successful applicant of the U of S Edwards School of Business Masters of Business Administration program, which he is planning to attend in the next few years. He grew up between Calgary, Saskatoon, Prince Albert, and Atakakoop Reserve in the Prince Albert area. He attended 2 years of residential school in Bow Valley, Saskatchewan, and he plans on continuing working in the justice field, hopefully being able to work with youth and alternative measures. So that is our panel tonight. Thank you. So I think tonight, Ailsa, Dr. Watkinson wanted to begin and sort of set out some information for tonight.
Is this on? Is everything, can you hear? Yes, okay, good, thanks. Caroline, I just wanted to mention that Raven Sinclair was to be another panelist. Raven is the Associate Director of the Indian Health Research Unit, and I know I don't have the full title when I say it like that, but she's had to bow out due to just being overcome by some dreadful flu by the sounds of things. As was said at the beginning, I'm the past president, or currently the past president of the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies, and I have been involved in Elizabeth Fry for a very long time. I keep thinking I should retire, step off the board, but I tell you, this work just really does get under your skin and into your blood, because it is a very desperate place. And I keep thinking I want to see something concrete happen. And as Caroline said, we are an abolitionist organization, and we believe sincerely that if prisons are the answer, it must have been a very silly question. Now, when Winston Churchill, a former Boer War prisoner of war, first became Home Secretary in 1910, he set his sight on reducing the prison population in England. He believed the mood, and this is a quote, "the mood and temper of the public to the treatment of crime and criminals was one of the most unfailing tests of the civilization of the country." So over a 30-year period, the prison population in England decreased from 63 per 100,000, and we've just heard tonight that the incarceration rate in Canada is 129 right now per 100. So he decreased it in England from 63 to 30 over a 30-year period. And I think that that's significant, because what it tells us is it can happen, that population in prisons can happen. But almost 100 years later, our federal Conservative government is proposing new, and we say regressive legislation, that will send more people to prison. The proposed legislation, and there's many pieces, and I have to be honest with you, we've been trying to sort out which pieces of legislation have passed and which ones haven't. Because, of course, as we all recall, Parliament was pierogies. And so when that happens, some of the pieces of legislation die on the order paper, but some of many pieces were passed, and now, in the last week, of course, we're hearing about more coming in. And one of the common touchstones in all of these pieces of legislation is the expansion of the net of mandatory minimum sentences. So you've got it over crimes that involve guns, anything to do with gangs, anything to do with lately, drive-by shootings, grow-ups, just all kinds of things. And a mandatory minimum sentence means that somebody is going to be sentenced at least for example, 10 years. No matter the circumstances, no matter the context, no matter the better thinking of the judge who is sentencing that person, that is going to be the sentence. So what you're going to see, of course, is an increase in the prison population for longer periods of time. And it is estimated by some who have been following this that it is going to mean an increase of at least 100 new prisons will have to be built to facilitate the growing population. And since 2005, the prison population has started to increase for the first time, and we can predict clearly that it will continue to rise. And here in Saskatchewan, the face of that prisoner is going to be 87% of the time, if not 90% of the time, a First Nations Aboriginal person. Now, I'm going to talk to you just a bit more from the perspective of the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Society. So I'm going to focus on women. And some of the things I'm going to say, I think, certainly will apply to men as well, but that has been our focus for the last, for my focus anyway, for the last 15 years. In Foucault's wonderful treatise called Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison, he goes through the history of the development of prisons in France in particular, and goes back to the 1700s and goes through the equivalent of Hansards that we would have here in our government. And there's a huge debate going on about whether or not they should officially set up this idea of prisons. And at the time, that notion was successful because it was considered more humane than the pillaring and staking of people in the city centres. But it was an experiment, and it's one of those experiments that has never come to an end. And as Caroline said, it's because of the inevitability of them. Everybody just expects it. But as Foucault says, there's never been any... and I'll just read this quote. Prisons, he said, are incapable of corresponding to the specificity of the crime because there's no effect on the public, because it is useless, even harmful to society. It is costly, it maintains convicts in idleness, it multiplies their vices. The execution of such a penalty is difficult to supervise, and because there is a risk of exposing prisoners to the arbitrary will of their guards. Because the job of depriving a person of their liberty and of supervising that person is an exercise of tyranny. So it's an interesting read. I read it once sitting on a beach, if you can imagine, but I had to get through the book, and I thought, well, I'll have a little bit of pleasure around me as I try and plow through this. But it's a very interesting book, and it's a very interesting historical account. Now, in 2003, well, actually it started in 2001, the Saskatchewan Elizabeth Fry Society filed a complaint initially with the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and we were starting this argument that the women prisoners are discriminated against. This folded into the national organization taking it over, along with the Native Women's Association of Canada and Sisters in Strength, an organization of women who have had the lived experience of prisons. And we asked the Human Rights Commission to do a systemic review rather than a complaint, a systemic review of the prison system here in Canada and the federal system. We were joined by over 25 equality-seeking groups from all across the country, including Amnesty International. As I said, Native Women's Association of Canada was a major player in this. The LEAF, the Legal Education Action Fund, the National Association of Women in the Law, and the Disabled Women's Organization as well. And we made presentations to the Canadian Human Rights Commission, as did others, and they took a snapshot across Canada in July of 2003, I think the date was, July 27th, and looked at the prison population. And in their report, they came to the conclusion that, yes, indeed, the prison system in Canada discriminates against women on the basis of their sex, on the basis of their ancestry, their racialized ancestry, and on the basis of disability. They talked about the fact that here in Canada, Aboriginal women account for 3% of the female population, but make over 30% of the women in the federal system. Now that's federal. We've had a snapshot of the picture for provincially sentenced women here, and that's 87% Aboriginal women. So in their report, which came out in 2004, as I said, they did find that the Corrections Services Canada, who has the jurisdiction for the prison systems, federal prison system, discriminates against women in a wide range of areas. Programming, there is no programming. In the risk assessment tools that they use for security classification, it discriminates, they said, on the basis of those sex, disability, religion, and ethnicity. In fact, the tool uses religion, ethnicity, and disability as a risk factor. It's considered a risk factor. And so what that means then is the women are classified higher. And so if you're a maximum security woman, you do not get access to the programming as sparse as it is, and you cannot go out on any kind of work programs or anything like that. So you're absolutely denied access to all kinds of programming, which may be part of your release plan, which is the catch-22 that is deeply embedded in the prison system. And for Aboriginal women, if they're classified as maximum and they make up almost the half of the women sentenced to maximum security, that means they have no access to Okama Ochi here in Maple Creek, which people I've heard, I suspect, a great deal about. So the Commission asked for all kinds of recommendations, put forward all kinds of recommendations. As far as we can tell, and truly we do try and keep track of this, none of those changes have been made. Yes. So in the human rights world, when something is found to discriminate against a certain group of people, the government has to be able to prove, well, sorry, yes, it does discriminate, but there's a very good reason why we need to maintain it. And so when we put the prison system through this kind of a sieve, it's very interesting. What we have to decide, first of all, is what is the purpose of prisons? And according to the law, it is to denounce unlawful conduct, to provide reparations for the harm done, to deter others, to ensure public safety, and for rehabilitation. Deterrence theory is, and it's actually based on Bentham's idea of the greatest good for the greatest number. And in fact, Bentham, apart from coming up with the utilitarian philosophy, played a huge role in the design of prisons, which I think is a very interesting little piece of history about him. But we have studies, I mean, the studies that will perhaps show that deterrence, that it is, prison is a deterrent, but then you have others that show that it is not. And one of the tests often to test deterrence is the recidivism rate. And in a study that was done a while ago, it showed that those who had done prison time as opposed to community-based time were more likely to recidivate than those who had been sentenced to commit another crime, you know, that you go to prison, you've done a crime, they're going to lock you away, you are very bad, and hopefully when you come out you're going to be fine. But for those who have gone to prison, this one study and others have shown that the what's the word? What are the words? Recidivism, but I'm trying to think of lay terms at this point because I hate to do it.
Just repeating.
To repeat a crime is more likely.
Enter jail again.
Yeah. When it comes to rehabilitation in the prisons, and especially for women, because their numbers are so small compared to men, they do not have the programming that men have. And please do not misinterpret me. I'm not saying that the programming that men have is good at all. In fact, lots of people think you can go to university and get a university degree, prison and get a university degree. Not at all. They no longer do that. That was stopped. So one of the programs that they do offer with great enthusiasm is a program that is designed to change one's cognitive behavior. And so it's a matter of getting into the mind of the prisoner and trying to change their behavior. Now, I'm never sure about these kinds of programs, but what concerns us is that there is no attempt in the programming that we have ever seen, and certainly not in this cognitive behavioral therapy sorts of things, any acknowledgement as to the system itself in the prison, the system itself out in the community, and the things that will lead to what we have defined as criminal behavior. This one program, this cognitive behavioral therapy program, is offered repeatedly throughout the prison. Now, one of the other reasons we have prisons is to protect the public. Both the Corrections Services Canada and the National Parole Board records indicate that less than half of 1%, that is 0.39% of federally sentenced women released into the community recidivate for violent crimes, thus suggesting that there is actually no need of an assessment for women based on risk. And actually that's one of the issues that we have been pushing for over and over again. Women aren't a risk factor, and the Canadian Human Rights Commission has said the same thing. And so the other thing we need to think about, well, what are the alternatives? And we'll talk about some of that today as well. But the alternatives that we know about and we have seen in the Youth Criminal Justice Act, it's in the Act, alternatives, and as was said earlier, we've seen then the incarceration rate for youth dropping. It needs to drop much further, but it has proven to work. Why can't we be taking some of those ideas and putting it into the sentencing provisions for adults as well? There's certainly community-based diversion options, community-based programming, restorative justice initiatives, healing circles, conferences, family conferences, but without a doubt, adequate financial and social supports need to be there as well. One of the highest, when we look at the crimes, in quotation marks, that women commit, they are, the majority of them are income-generating crimes. And so that tells you, I think, a story about the need for social and financial supports. There's a huge cost. I mean, when you look at proportionality between imprisonment and other alternative measures, there's great damage to families. There's health costs. I went to give blood one day. I haven't given blood for a very, very long time. Went there. One of the first questions they asked was whether or not I'd been in prison. And of course, what they're concerned about is Hep C. And again, I think, case closed. Case closed. Close these places. People become infected. They become very ill. All sites, and suicide, Hep C, as I said, HIV infections, and the financial cost. I just want to go back to the cost of families. When the Children's Advocate came out with the report this week about the situation facing children in foster care in the Saskatoon region, even though it was focused on Saskatoon, we can all assume it applies all the way across the country. Our office received calls from some of the women in prison, as you can well imagine, just desperate, because what is going on with their children, because that's in a high percentage of them end up in foster care. When Nelson Mandela became president in 1993, he passed a law that released all of the women and all of the people with a mental disability from the prisons. Nelson, come to Saskatoon or Regina. So there's all kinds of laws associated with it, and we believe strongly that there are alternatives, that prisons, as I said before, if this was are an experiment, but they are still here, and they carry on in an unquestioning manner. And I guess that's one of the things we want to talk about today, is just to raise this. There's not an inevitability to prisons. It is something that hopefully we can all be thinking about and coming up with other means of working with people who find themselves in conflict with the law. And just before I finish, I just want to bring to your attention the case of Ashley Smith. Today, I don't know if you've been listening to the radio, but Ashley Smith died on October the 19th, 2007. She was in a segregation cell in the Grand Valley Institute for Women in Kitchener. She entered into the system at the age of 15, And what she had done initially to get her into trouble, she went into the to the youth system, of course, was she was caught throwing crab apples to the postal carrier. And things just escalated. She was, without a doubt, a young person with enormous mental health issues. When she turned 18, she was moved up into the federal system. And within 11 months, she was transferred 10 times across the country. And when I say that, it's being transferred from Nova in Nova Scotia out to the Fraser Valley Institute in British Columbia, to Edmonton, to the RPC in Saskatoon, and so on. She had all of these transfers in that very small period of time. While she was at RPC in Saskatoon, she was assaulted, and the guard has been charged with assaulting her. She ended up the last few days of her life at Grand Valley Institute in Waterloo, in Kitchener. Our executive director of CAFES went to see her, and Ashley had been stripped of all clothing. She was in this segregated cell. She had only we call them a horse blanket on her, and she had actually picked the tiles off the floor. She had no books, she had no paper, she had absolutely nothing to do, and she was mentally unstable. She tried a number of times to harm herself, self-harm. Today, the correctional investigator issued their report and described her death as absolutely preventable. They said that she was let down by the system, obviously. She it came out in the report that when she was self-harming herself, there was an instruction that nobody interfere. She did asphyxiate herself, but we are not convinced that it was suicide. Rather, we believe that she was cold, she couldn't sleep, she was absolutely tormented, and this was one way of trying to fall asleep. When she did this, they left her for a long period of time because they were told not to interfere unless she wasn't breathing. By the time they got in there, she was dead. And so his report is absolutely damning of the system. This is one report, this is one life. There have been many of them. Okay, thank you. I'll pass it on.
Elsa. And I'm not sure who wants to follow that up, Bonnie or Hirsch?
Yeah, I'm not sure I could sort of add a whole lot to what's already been said between Caroline and Elsa, but I'll give it a shot. I'll try and jump over some of the things that have already been stated. So thanks very much for coming out tonight, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to share some of my thoughts and opinions and to reflect on some of my experience. I thought my first task was to respond to the framing of the agenda, because I really don't see much benefit in sort of debating tougher laws or sentencing standards as if it's some sort of economic balancing act. The more dear the cost, the fewer people who could afford the expense. So paying a dear price for a criminal offense does not make our cities safer for two reasons. One is individuals or groups who commit crime do not stop to think about what it costs in terms of sentencing. They think about not getting caught. And the second reason is that stricter sentencing conditions occur after the crime is committed. So I have to ask myself is why do some Canadians choose to believe that tough on crime is actually a solution? And how does incarcerating, punishing, and extracting some retribution from those criminals as if they're aliens and not our brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and cousins and uncles, those criminals who could harm us make us safer? So if punishment alone was successful, then jurisdictions such as the United States would be, I think, one of the safest countries on earth. And notably, the U.S. is indeed one of the most violent societies if we measure it by the number of serious crimes per 100,000 that occurs in that country. Darrell Fears, which interesting name for a reporter of the Washington Post, reported on a thought by Scott Thorpe, who was then chief executive of the California District Attorneys Association, when he asked, what is the appropriate number of people to be incarcerated to ensure public safety? His answer was, I don't know if you can answer that one. Fears also observed and reported in the Washington Post, and this is in June 2008, that the cost to taxpayers in California for incarcerating individuals is about $45 billion per year, and is causing the state, such as and other states, as well as California, to rethink, to reconsider harsh criminal penalties. The system is beginning to implode under the cost of the three-strike clause. So why are Canada's parliamentarians pushing for tougher laws in the face of this experience? So one of the questions I ask myself is there a Canadian consensus on the satisfaction with the criminal justice system? Is there a need to actually sort of improve it, make sentencing tougher? The underlying and most often unstated assumption, I think, being promoted is that there is indeed a Canadian consensus, that we all want tougher sentences. While I don't think this is factual, derogatory statements calling criminals punks, as was advertised in some recent election material, and get tough language often inflame the public sentiment with fear, and I think derail an informed opinion about what works and what actually doesn't. And this is not to say that alternatives are perfect, but we know that punishment alone, that is, tougher sentencing standards, as a single response to a complex problem is really ineffective. Judge Barry Stewart suggests that just increasing the severity of punishment of youth who commit crimes does not deter youth from crime, but rather desensitizes them from the punishment. It desensitizes them from the pain. Mark Totten, in his presentation on gangs, reported on a longitudinal study that repeatedly showed association with deviant peers is the strongest correlate of escalation in how adolescents problem solve. So if you put all the bad guys all in one room, guess what they're going to find out about each other? How to be better bad guys. So is there only one light approach? The criminal justice system now in use under Canadian jurisdictions adopts the notion of an eye for an eye, some form of punishment, general or specific deterrence for what is perceived as some intolerable wrong. Somehow this universal approach is the one light that should serve all situations. Yet it is commonly accepted by most researchers, for example, that Aboriginal peoples in Canada are ill-served by the Canadian criminal justice practices, and in general, the eye for an eye approach seems to be ill-suited to address the problem. Youngblood, Henderson, and McClasson summarize it in this way. From our experiences, most Aboriginal peoples have never understood the exotic passion of Eurocentric society for labeling people as criminals and then having to make them suffer. Caroline talked about some of the general patterns of crime. I'll try and go through it quickly. There's slightly different statistics, but essentially saying the same thing over a 10-year period in the 1990s, from the mid-90s to about 2003, is generally speaking, criminal code incidents have declined through the 90s, increasing only in 2003 by 6%, which was the first substantial increase in over a decade. And this is from the Canadian Centre for Justice Statistics. With respect to violent crimes, assault and sexual assault, it began dropping in 1973. Among male youth from 91 to 2003, there has been a drop of 9% in violent crimes. At the same time, there's been a 25% increase in female youth charged, and I think it goes to part of the criminalization of women. A general decline in the homicides has also been evident since 1973. Rates of robberies have been relatively stable, with a 5% increase in 2003. There was a spike there. Break and enters in 2003 was lower per 100,000 population than in the early 70s. Youth and adult crimes have generally decreased, although there could be fluctuations within various criminal code offenses. So what affects crime rates? Well, age for one. We're getting older, at least I am, and so there are fewer young people that causes grief. Unemployment, poverty, and income inequality reduce opportunities for recreational activities, while people who are employed are most likely to provide, have purchasing power. They are able to have social bonds, and thereby they raise the informal social control. So poverty and unemployment and income equality begins to destroy those natural bonds. Aggregate levels of economic distress, such as inflation and unemployment, and we're clearly in such a period now, undermine the whole idea of legitimacy and order, according to Devine and Company, and this is not Grant. Alcohol and drug consumption is another factor, which has been shown consistently throughout much of the research as a co-occurrence of alcohol, drugs, and crime. Sentencing and incarceration, and Elsa has already mentioned this, but prisons serve a function of deterrence, incapacitation, and rehabilitation through treatment, and some might argue that the latter is sadly lacking. Interestingly, that in the U.S., as incarceration rates increased, violent crime did indeed decrease. However, it is not known if this change occurred as a result of the deterrence, incapacitation, and/or rehabilitative aspects of prisons. We do know that the cost of prisons in the U.S. increased by $20 billion per year since the mid-1970s. In contrast, Canada's approach was much more community-based. Conditional sentences, alternative sanctions, and restorative justice options are meaningful alternatives to imprisonment. Therefore, as Bunge and other authors argue, that explanations focusing on sentencing policy or incarceration rates as cause and effect do not apply to Canada to the same extent as in the United States. So essentially you're left with why spend the money if you get the same result in a community setting as you would in jail. So my point here is twofold. One, crime changes over time, and it is a complex array of social, economic, psychological, sociological determinants. And secondly, crime is not a problem. It is indeed a symptom. Arguing for tougher laws without context of the determinants of crime is akin to keeping peace by force. And I paraphrased Einstein, who said, peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding. And finally, the causes of crime are not simply bad people doing bad things. Economic opportunity, gender, urbanization, poverty, racism, all contribute in some way, but not necessarily consistently, nor equally across the country or even within a region. And finally, legislation is not some crime-proof vest making our communities safer. So what do Canadians really think about crime? We know that what politicians think. We're at war, at least some do. The recent announcement by our Attorney General to increase incarceration rates for a gang-related murder purports to keep us safer, as I'm sure the gangs noted this proposed change and adapted their behavior accordingly. Not all politicians think alike, however. Take, for instance, Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor from 161 to 180, who stated, "Poverty is the mother of crime." Clearly a disparate view from that of our Attorney General. So what do Canadians think? There are many factors influencing our opinions, whether we are young or old, male or female, urban or rural Canadians, and whether we live in central Canada or western Canada. Interestingly, according to the General Public Survey conducted by Jennifer Tufts for the Canadian Centre for Justice Statistics, fully 1/3 of Canadians who support imprisonment would also support alternatives to incarceration instead of prison if the alternatives were 1 year of probation and 200 hours of community service. So as with the complex array for the causes of crime, not all Canadians think alike with respect to crime and punishment, which is a good thing, and that Canadians, much more than Americans, would consider alternatives to imprisonment with qualification. So what works? One is that we need to collaborate. We need to stop working in silos, and we need to address the triad of prevention, intervention, and suppression concurrently. We need to use problem-solving strategies that address the causes of crime rather than being mostly focused on the symptom reduction strategies which we're currently engaged in. Contrasting efforts on most difficult to manage populations, concentrating efforts on the most difficult to manage populations, those that are most in need, the population with the most co-occurring issues. We need to invest in reducing poverty. Don't do it to or with communities. Enable them to do it themselves. If communities take ownership, it'll get done. Avoid dependence on professionals wherever possible, and it's preferable. Accessible, affordable, and available programming. And it's not only about the technical program elements, such as cognitive behavioral therapy. It's the people who deliver it. It's about the relationships which are built. Public engagement, such as tonight's forum, is important to broaden our perspectives, challenge us to ask questions, and to make informed decisions, rather than debate ad nauseum whether a 5 or 25-year sentence or more is the best strategy to respond to crime. In closing, I'd like to refer to the work of Gwen Robinson and Joanna Chaplin, who looked at whether restorative justice could contribute to reducing recidivism. They uncovered Maxwell and Morris's work, which found that conference-specific factors relevant to reducing reoffending included feelings of remorse by the offender, not being made to feel bad during the process, feeling involved in decision-making, including the victim, agreeing with the outcome, and meeting and apologizing to the victim. Change is possible. However, if we keep taking the same old tired, tough on crime approach and expect different outcomes, we'll be disappointed. Human beings are the only species that recognizes when something doesn't work and then does more of the same.
Thank you. Thank you,
I've got
Hirsch.
another 10 pages, but
Bonnie?
Well, that's pretty hard to follow. Hirsch has already identified that poverty is the creation of a lot of the crime that we experience, and that people are imprisoned because of that. Each and every one of us, don't think that you're not capable of doing some of the things that the folks we deal with who are imprisoned, don't think that you're beyond doing some of what they've had to do. I'll tell you right now, I am a criminal. I just don't have a record. When I was living in poverty, I had to hunt, fish, and trap at a season, and I got caught by the game warden. Only I was fortunate because I was a single parent. He took pity and said, you have two options. I can either take you to jail, or I can take you to the nearest town, which was like 30 miles away, and have you put on welfare. I chose to go on welfare, and I'm going to tell you, sometimes I wish I'd actually gone to jail, because that was a time, as much as I was hunting and fishing and trapping and it was illegal, I could feed my child. When I got put on welfare, I couldn't. But we today say that what we give to people on social assistance, and even the working poor, is enough. Try living on it. We live in an economic boom here today. But that's only if you're one of the rich ones having the money coming into your pocket. We've seen shelter rates increasing. We've seen lack of shelter. Here in Regina, and I know Saskatoon is equal to this, we have less than half of 1% vacancy rates at any given time. That's less than 100 vacancies. Where do people go when they need to go someplace, when they need to change their housing, or they're evicted for whatever reason? I didn't, and I know the people that I work with, didn't wake up one day and say, God, doesn't poverty look great? I aspire to be poor. Nor did I wake up one day, or any of the people that we work with that happen to have the unfortunate pleasure of facing the criminal justice system, of saying, I think I'm going to be criminal. It's not something that they intentionally did, other than they were forced into doing it because of the realities of the day. And as long as we as citizens allow our government bodies to put in place things like social services and minimum wages that are not living wages, we contribute to the ability or the necessity of people to have to commit a criminal act to be able to meet their basic needs. I hope nobody in this room thinks that young women and young boys and women and men go out on 11th and 12th Ave and 13th Ave here in Regina and prostitute themselves because they're just oversexed. That's not the reality. The reality is they need to have to try to figure out how they're going to come up with the money that they need, that we as society say that they're not entitled to. Every time there's a rollback in social policy, we make it even more possible for people to have to commit a crime just to meet their basic needs. I'm here to tell you today, I think what's really more criminal today in our society, past the people that, we're talking about, they're going to be institutionalized, are the systems that we put in place and we sustain with our tax dollars to be there. Each and every time a politician says to you, oh, your tax dollars, we've got to figure out a better way of spending it, so we need to figure out how to cut people off of assistance. You need to be saying, and what's going to happen when they do that? In 1996, every province, territory, and the federal government entered into a cost-shared program called the Canada Assistance Plan Act. And that was in 1966. Under that act, all social programs were 50-50 cost-shared. And it was agreed upon by all levels of government. In 1995, when Paul Martin was the Minister of Finance, he didn't consult provincial bodies and territorial bodies and say, I'm going to do this. He brought in a money bill that canceled out the Canada Assistance Plan Act, which means that the federal government no longer cost-shares social programs. So what that has meant is that financial burden has been dumped onto our provincial governments, who now have to figure out ways of trying to deal with it as well. And usually what it is it's cutting back on what people get so we can make it go farther across more people. Along with the Canada Assistance Plan Act, there were standards that were put in place. You had to, when you were in need, you were guaranteed an adequate standard of living. Adequate didn't mean not enough to live on. But when the Canada Health and Social Transfer came in, that's exactly what we went to. Just bang. We lost the standards that we were given and granted. They just disappeared. So even the money that the federal government sends to our provinces thinking it's going to go to social programs, it can be put into infrastructure. There's no measures in there to say, we gave you this much for social programming, where did it go? They don't even have to be answerable to that. Just as long as they can say we got a welfare program. In 2006, when this federal government under Harper came in, they actually went in April to the United Nations, and they supported the programs that we had, the social programs, literacy programs, the court challenges program. That was in April. Then in September, they cut funding to literacy programs. And I'm going to tell you folks, if it wasn't for those literacy programs, I wouldn't be here before you today. When I was on welfare, I had to start at grade 5. And even though I started at grade 5, I had to have a tutor because my reading level was so low, I couldn't read at a grade 5 level. It was those programs that helped me to be where I am today and to be able to do the kind of work that I do, and to be opinionated. It just helped to build that. But in 2006, major fundings were cut from the literacy programs, from women's programs, the court challenges programs, and since then we've seen legal aid starting to disappear. So when the folks we're talking about today, when they're charged with something, it's harder for them to be able to access legal aid for counsel. Where's the justice? If we're going to charge them with something, I think as a fair and a just society, we need to ensure that they have proper legal counsel as well. But that money's being whittled away. What they're doing here today is further criminalizing poverty, because the majority of people in jails are those living in poverty. Under what we're seeing happening, there are going to be winners and losers. The winners are going to be the justice system. Each time we hear that there's an increase in criminal action, and we've already heard that it's lower. In 2006, it was the lowest. But we're hearing that there's this huge increase. And I think we need to be challenging the information that's coming across to us and where it's coming from. If on one hand we're being told that it's the lowest it was, and now we're being told, well, we need to do this because everything's on the rise. We need, as citizens, to be asking, show us the proof in that. But when they bring it in, let's face it, each time we hear that there's an increase in crime in Regina, we get more police. I'm not saying we don't need police, we do. But that's where the money's going, is hiring more police to address it. I think what we need to be doing is looking and calling on our governments to ensure that people have the ability to be able to feed and clothe and house themselves at an adequate standard. And an adequate standard, under my definition, doesn't mean less than enough. A single mother with one child or two children is only entitled to $555 for rent. I live in Core. That's approximately $200 short of what they need to live in the Core community here in Regina, because the housing costs have gone up so much. We continue to watch. There are things our governments can do. I continue to lobby with our government, as do many other people, that don't just give the increase in benefits to somebody on social assistance, because as soon as you do, the landlord ups the rent, so you're no further ahead than what you were when you first started. We need to have rent control so that we can get that market under control. We see the increase in the need for judges and lawyers and institutions, like jails. And who are the losers? The losers are the people who are criminalized because of their poverty, and it's you and I as taxpayers. I think our money could be going better places. There are examples right here in Regina of community programs that actually work. I was the chair of the Core Community Association for a number of years, and we had a lot of crime. And I guess the other side of it is our city has funding, and they'll figure out which one of Core or North Central that can yell the loudest of who gets the most money. We were able to yell loud one time, and we ended up getting a park, a green space for our kids to play. Before that park was put in, and it has basketball nets in it, before that park was put in, there'd be garages broke into, cars were keyed. As soon as that park went in, and kids had some place to go, that kind of stuff stopped. Our garages didn't get broke into anymore. Then some of the look of our neighborhood started to change. We started getting wealthier people starting to move into our neighborhood. I don't know a better way of saying it than that, but people with more money. We started to become yuppieized. And as soon as that started happening, we had people screaming about the bouncing balls at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. I live right across from the park. I don't mind the bouncing balls, because at least then I know the kids are busy. But that kept our kids busy. What has the city done now? They've brought in a bylaw that says that people have to be out of that park by 11:30 at night. What do you think our kids are going to start doing again? These children were hurting nobody. And it wasn't just kids, it was grown-ups too. They were out there bouncing the balls. North Central is another prime example of how community can provide something other than a jail. And it's around anti-gang programming. And through North Central Community Association, they've started this, and they have had success of people coming out of the gangs and learning that there's a different way of life, and that there's support there in that community for you for a different way of life. It's all of our responsibility to build the community that we want and be part of it. Don't just turn your back and allow our governance, which used to govern through democratic process, which doesn't do that anymore. Our governance, whether it's federal or provincial, is governing on executive power. There's no consulting us anymore as to what it is that we want. And I'd like to say to you right now that not one social program in this country came about because a political party thought it was the right thing to do. As much as Tommy Douglas supported health care, he wasn't the father of it. It was created because of rural communities that needed health care. We need to be involved in creating the communities we want, and don't allow our government levels to create the kinds of communities we don't want. And I don't think any of us want criminalized communities. That's where I live, and I don't want to see it criminalized. The people I live next to, although they may have to commit a crime to be able to feed their family, they're still my neighbors, and I still want to be able to provide something else for them other than a jail cell for a few months or a few years. And I would hope that the rest of the people in the population of this province would feel like that as well. And I guess the only other thing that I'd have to say is that we've got to stop letting fear and ignorance allow us to have things put in place. We need to overcome that fear. We need to educate ourselves as to what's happening, why it's happening, and be part of the creative solution, not allowing it to happen to us. So that's it.
Thank you, Bonnie. Now, our last two speakers actually are involved in some of the alternatives that have been talked about tonight and different ways of doing things from RAMP. So we hand that over to you.
Okay. I guess we're here to, we've heard a lot of negative about the proposed changes to the YCGA, and we're kind of here as an example of something good that has come from the YCGA, which are alternative measures programs. I'm from RAMP, the Regina Alternative Measures Program, and Jay here works with the HEAT program, as mentioned before. We're in the same building, but he's just a little bit more involved with the youth, and he'll talk to you about that. I also had a quote earlier from Michael Foucault, and it said, "Prison is incapable of corresponding to the specificity of crimes because it has no effect on the public." And I think that's a really interesting way of where RAMP steps in that we do involve the public, in that we involve the community and victims, where traditionally the criminal justice system doesn't. So our role is to receive referrals from the Crown Prosecutor, as well as we can also accept pre-charge referrals from police. We can also operate based on community referrals. If there's people in the community who want to deal with conflict in a more holistic way, they can get a hold of RAMP, and we've done that before. But yes, with a focus with our relationship with the justice system, we accept adult referrals and youth referrals. And we're based on the philosophy of restorative justice, and I'm not sure if that's actually been named tonight, but and who actually in the audience has ever heard of restorative justice? Just raise of the hand. Okay, so this is something that we are somewhat familiar with, but it's probably, not out there in the general public about what that is. And I think for RAMP and for HEAT, it's really a way of focusing on behavior as opposed to a person as a whole. Sorry. We're focusing on behavior and not the person. We're not punishing that person for who they are as a whole. It's just their behavior. So with that, we involve the accused, as is, in the justice system, that's the wording that they use. They can become involved when we meet them at court, and we ask them if this is something they'd like to partake in. So to that end, the program is voluntary. If they cannot accept responsibility for the charge that they've been laid, then we need to discuss whether or not RAMP is appropriate for them. Once they do accept responsibility and are interested in coming through the program, we open up the process to the victims who have been affected by that crime. So we send letters, we make phone calls, we talk about what RAMP does, which is ultimately to mediate that conflict. So if the victim is interested in being involved, we invite them to sit down with that accused and go through a mediation process where the end goal is to come up with an agreement that will satisfy that that charge or that crime. So, sorry, I'm just drawing a blank. So we, through that mediation process, we we first ask that accused what they would like to do, what would help them settle this for themselves, whether we can get all different kinds of referrals for different kinds of charges. If it's a theft, for example, or an assault, we ask them what they'd like to do to have this settled. And hopefully they've come to the mediation with some ideas for themselves. Either they want to pay the victim back, or they want to do some community service hours, etc. And then we also turn to the victim and say, what would you like to see happen? And when you look at a court system, that's something that isn't ever really done. The court doesn't invite the victim to have any kind of say. The only allowance they do have is a victim impact statement, and that's only ever used in very serious trials, for example. So in this way, the victim does get to have a say and comment on what they would like to see happen. Our roles is to remain neutral, to just mediate that conversation, and just guide them along that process as to what's going to satisfy both parties in the best way possible. RAMP, also does other things aside from our work with our referrals from court. We also try to do lots of things in the community to be preventative. So we just hosted a youth and elder symposium a couple weeks ago, and that's part of reaching out to the community and getting people involved and really taking ownership, as we've heard earlier, for our own communities. And also heard you mention to Albert School, the elementary school, one of the community schools in North Central. We're trying to involve young people, grade 5 and 6, at an early age in positive ways of dealing with conflict, where we try to kind of pass on those skills of mediation and conflict resolution and allowing them to come up with the answers as opposed to, someone telling them how it should be. So I guess I could go on about the details of RAMP and how we process clients and everything, but ultimately I think the reason for us being here is just to kind of demonstrate an alternative to what's being done, and that's come from the YCGA. It's within the YCGA that we can exist as kind of a sidestep to the court system that we have now. So I'm just going to leave it at that and turn it to Jay, and be interested to hear any questions that you have after the break.
Thank you.
Tansei, Anine, hello. Thanks for the elder for saying a few words, and thank you for everyone to show up to listen to us. I'm glad there's not a huge auditorium. I'm not a great speaker, I guess, to big crowds, but I guess Ashley spoke recently about our Youth and Elder Conference, which I got nominated to MC. I've never done that before, so this is a smaller crowd. Like I tell my kids, I deal strictly with youth. It's a growing experience. Every experience leads to a lesson learned, and you don't get to be successful just into one shot. So this is my learning experience also. So my name is Jay Smith. I started with Regina Alternative Measures back in, September. I really had no idea what alternative justice was. So it's been quite the learning process. I moved to Regina in July. I seen an ad. I thought I'd better check it out. It looked pretty interesting. Like I had a degree in Aboriginal sociology and justice. Like I've had experience with National Parole Board. I've seen the Lifer files and read them, and I went down to correctional level and took some correctional training. I took the DOJAC training. The whole idea was to get involved with Aboriginal people and try to create some sort of healing process. My heart was there, but each level I thought I can't do this. I'm not meant for this. So I went down to correctional, and the training, they start with shackling and taking down and just punitive kind of stuff, which it didn't agree with me. So I thought, okay, I'll check out youth. So we did DOJAC training, and they took us in, showed us all around, and it's just unfortunate that they didn't start with the punitive shackling and also the shields and the helmets that they have to use. They started with showing us who we're with, who we're dealing with, and they're all brown kids. I'm a brown kid. I'm a brown kid at heart. I'm still a kid. Anybody that knows me, I'm still a kid. And I thought, okay, I got to do this. I got to help these kids. Like, I got to at least try and engage and help one out. And one of the things that got to me was really sensitive was in the girls' dorm. Like, these girls are 15, 16, pregnant, and they got mental challenges. It just really disturbed me, and I thought, okay, I got to do something and rethink my career. And it just so happens, on my first day, they called me into DOJAC. I'd seen the alternative measures, so I decided, okay, instead of that, they looked at my resume. Instead of that, I'll go to my interview and see what that's all about. So I never had any management experience before. I'm the HEAD program coordinator, help eliminate auto theft. They described what the process was, and they thought, what do you think about restorative justice? And I talked about a lot of stuff my dad said. He was a justice elder. He passed away from a Takakoop. And a lot of my experiences were right north central, we're core neighborhood. And I said, that guy walking across the street, the little skinny guy and shaggy hair and stuff, that was me. What I want to do is engage youth. I want to let them know that that's where I was. I was 16 years old. I had my first kid. I got 4 children now. They're all beautiful. And I just, like I tell the kids, you don't get there at one time. I was there when you're 16 years old. I was there also. So, which is why it was quite the surprise that this is what we do. This is what you're going to be expected to do. So what the Help Eliminate Auto Theft program is, it's Regina Alternative Measures. It's based on the mediation process, the restorative justice. A kid commits a crime, in my case, usually is stealing a car or being involved in somewhat in stealing automobiles. And of course, they take something away from a victim. They take them to a place like, why me? Like, well, why did they do this to me? And then the whole restorative justice process is like letting them know, I did not target you specifically. There's things in my life that caused me to do this. Like what we do is called Community Justice Forum. It's similar to CJF, and for many different reasons, which is why youth only go through CJFs. It's based on like circle sentencing type of thing. It's based on talking circle. It's taken the whole circle idea and like molding it into like what CPS and RCMP thing should be added into it. It's collaboration, and I'm happy with it. It's not pure Aboriginal or circle philosophy, but it works. What we do is we get the kid together with hopefully the victim, and it's really victim orientated. We get them together with a victim. We have a person like Ashley or myself who are community justice facilitators, and there's also some HEAT staff that do that. And the whole idea is to guide a conversation as to understanding what's going on. Well, how did this affect the victim? And the victim is pretty vocal and saying, you totally devastated my life. Like, and the victim hopefully shows some remorse. The idea is for the offender to show remorse, to take responsibility, and to do what they can, come up themselves and the victim, come up between themselves some sort of agreement. Like, how can you make this better? And how do you think? And the idea is to get them to suggest a problem and how to fix it without using the courts. The courts, for a lot of these kids, maybe they're joyriding, maybe they just, whatever, made a mistake, a thinking error, cognitive skills error. And so the Crown, they're educated in this, and the RCMP are educated in this, and they say, okay, this kid, we only take first-time offenders. This kid got into some trouble, they had no record, maybe they're in school or whatever, but they seem them fit to go through our program. For some reason, our program is highly regarded, probably because of me running it. Just kidding. No, but it's been proven to work. Like, the kids that go through the program, there's not very many stats, but it seems to work. There's no reoffense. There is reoffense in auto theft. There's reoffense in other areas, but the idea is to get that reoffending rate down, which kind of has, I guess, a testament to that is the last stat that I heard was, I'll tell you the story behind HEAT. There's, from what I've read, there has been, back in the early 2000s, 2001, and before that, the auto theft limit was sky high. It went, in 4 years, it went from, let's say, around 1,500 cases in 1 year to, I think in 2000, to like close to 4,000 cases of auto theft, which there's so many different reasons why. But ever since the inception of the auto theft program, from what I hear, the last that I heard, it went down 68%, and that's like a huge testament to any crime. Like 68% is crazy. So now, like my program, the auto theft program, like we had a steady stream of first-time offenders coming through. So I guess, in the past year or two, there's been a significant decline in the numbers that are coming through. Like the kids that are coming through our program that don't reoffend in auto offense. I can't say they don't reoffend. So our funders, or CPS and SGI, wasn't there and there sometimes. They believe in our program, and because we don't have the caseload that we used to have, they don't want to discontinue funding. They want us to take on like other offenses to see how, if we can affect like those rates. So that's pretty good. I'm pretty excited about that. What we do works. It's the reason why it works is we don't take huge amounts of caseloads, and like I've worked at the pro board and I've seen a lot of like how many files like they use. They don't have the skill and ability, which like for me, I think I have a connectability with youth. Like I said, I'm a big kid. And our staff are selected because of that natural ability to gauge in youth. In Dojak, there's so many kids. Like, how can you sit down and talk to one alone for a significant amount of time? I don't understand how. That's the philosophy, but that's not the reality in there. So our program, we don't have as many caseloads, which is ideal for CPS and us. We have the resources, we have the time. They fund this kind of well, I guess, but we have the resources, we have the talent in our program to be able to engage youth. If I can't do it, one of my other staff members will. If they go missing, it's up to us to go find them. Are they in school? We physically go out and find them. How come you're not here? How come you're not at your appointment? You got to make sure you have this appointment. You have your all sorts of appointments they go to. I guess that's a success of something like kind of a program like mine, is that we have the resources, we have the natural talented staff that kids, they open up to. I'm just glad that I'm where I am. Like coming down from where I thought I wanted to be to where I am. Like I think I'm making a difference to, if I have 20 kids in 1 year and 15 of them don't reoffend, and they still call me friend and they still come and visit me. Like, this is a position that I've always wanted. So I feel very, very lucky to be here. I don't know how I got here, really. Like, I'm sitting with these guys and have all this knowledge, and I'm just happy to be here, and I'm glad you guys invited me. I just want to say, like, there's a lot of thought that went behind this program, and a lot of thought behind like who works in there. And I can see from what Hirsch was saying, or was it Hirsch? I forget who was saying, but they're talking about like programming and how the programming in like the system. Like I know the scoring systems, I know the statistical information on recidivism scale that they use, the actuarial scales, and how they classify an inmate like low, medium, high, and to like what intensity do they have to take this program and how many times. And like I understand that, but I think I'm very more suited to something like this, which I don't know I'm here, but I'm just saying. It's pretty awesome. So I'm not sure what else I have to say. I guess I can just wait for your questions.
Thank you, Jay. We're glad you're here too. So thank you to all our panelists tonight. And we have a pretty small group, so I think we can be very informal. I'm not sure if people want a few minutes break or if you just want to go right into questions and conversation. What do the panelists want? You want to go ahead? Do you want to just jump into it then? There are mics set up if you want. If you have some questions or if you have a comment, please feel free. And it's a small group, and we can have a really intimate conversation here if you'd like, and direct your questions to any one of the panel members or to the people in the audience too, if you'd like.
Am I on?
There's a light on.
Yep.
Yep.
Am I on? Yep. Yeah, it is a pathetic crowd, actually. A lot of people are in jail because of drug-related crimes, and according to you, but because they want to earn money from prostitution, do you think that drugs and prostitution should be legalized? And my second question is, if poverty were reduced, let's say you gave people a minimum wage of $30,000 a year, whatever, and reduced jail time would lead to reduced crime. Is there any jurisdiction in the world where that has been done and crime has been reduced?
Sorry, who are you directing the question to? Anybody?
I want to answer.
Oh.
Well, you for the prostitution and drug
I don't want to see prostitution legalized. In fact, it's a position of the case that it be decriminalized. Actually, of course, as we know, and it's not so much prostitution that is currently criminalized, it's the soliciting that is the criminal activity.
Aren't a lot of women in jail for prostitution?
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, it's actually solicitation. I mean, I know it's okay. It's just one of those funny little technicalities. But we want to just see it decriminalized. It means that it's not a crime. And so we're not, pardon?
So it's legal.
But if it's to be legalized, then there would be all kinds of controls put on it. And the worry is that by legalizing it, even though that's better than the criminalizing of it, that there's going to be all these kinds of controls, and we don't believe that it's going to solve the problem. We just want it decriminalized, and in fact, the criminal activity, if you want to keep criminalizing anybody, it'd be the buyers. So that's our position at CAVES. In regards to drugs, I think it's very interesting that with this latest proposals coming out from the government, if I was reading it correctly, they're going to they're spreading the net again widely over gang activity and even grow-ups. Now, gang activities, as some of the editorial writers have been writing in the last couple of days, is tied closely to the drug trade. And so this raises the question for all of us again as to why we criminalize some things and not others. I mean, we just need to think, it wasn't even, I don't know, it wasn't even 3 years ago, it seems to me, that we were talking about legalizing marijuana. And we had this discussion, we were this close, and then all of a sudden, kaboom, and now this mandatory minimum is being applied to those who have grow-ups for marijuana. So I think that's a great little case, as sad as it is, but a good case to look at because it talks about what we criminalize, and then it talks about how we can quickly turn something into a crime, even though we were thinking just the other day that maybe it isn't, and now we're going to extend the net.
The alcohol companies that are pushing that legislation to keep marijuana from being legalized because it would come to their profits.
Okay, I haven't seen anything about that, but I can see what you're getting at. So, and so some of the editorial writers talking about the gangs have been saying, hang on a sec, you're looking at the wrong thing. You're throwing the bill at the wrong thing here. We should be having this discussion about some sort of controlling and decriminalizing of some of the drugs.
I mean, the prison population, a lot of it, I think maybe the majority of people in there are drug-related crimes, either possession or growing or trafficking. If that were made legal, then you would decrease the population, the prison population,
Yep.
perhaps half.
Yeah.
You asked if there was any jurisdiction where poverty was alleviated and it reduced crime? Was that generally, yeah. Are you from Regina? Sorry, yeah. Whitmore Park, Albert Park? No, but those are jurisdictions. Yeah, I mean, the majority of people, that live in relative comfort don't commit crimes. The majority are. Well, I mean, there's exceptions. I mean, the Conrad Black's in jail too, but I wouldn't sort of count him as one of the poor. But I think that Bonnie's comment is that what we do in part is we criminalize poverty, because the social bonds that help us work together informally break down when we're poor. Oh, but if you just weigh it out proportionally, there's no comparison. There's just absolutely no comparison. Like I say, Conrad Black's in jail, but when the 5 guys escaped from the correctional center last summer, big national news media coverage, right? So I asked my class, and most of them are women, did you change your behavior as a result of this news flash that these 5 guys are out and are dangerous? And they all said no. I said, are you sure? Like, you didn't take any extra precautions? No, they said. And at the same time, there was the listeriosis outbreak. And I asked them how many stopped eating cold cuts. They all did. So, and Maple Leaf wasn't charged with murder. So there's a disproportionate approach to, areas of accountability and responsibility for behavior. And we can go into food security and centralization of food production and why that led to the outbreak nationally. But 20 people died, for God's sakes. And who's been called on the carpet for it, The government didn't even come out and say anything. They took a back seat and they allowed the president of Maple Leaf to say, geez, gosh, I'm sorry. Right? And then people get all upset when, I mean, we're in the age of apology, right? Everybody's apologizing for everything, right? But apologies don't cut it. It has to be related to behavior. So, anyways.
I just want to make a point, though. Another point following up on that last part of your question. When Caroline started with the statistics of different countries that had the low, Norway's low. And of course, Norway has a very good social program and a strong safety net. And so I... So, So that's an interesting thing for us to be contemplating as well.
Some of us are influenced by the U.S. Some.
Well, I really enjoyed what everyone had to say, and it brought back a lot of memories for me over the years, having worked with Bonnie or Hirsch on different occasions. I guess I have a comment or a series of comments. My head was just all over the place as I was listening to the presentations. And the first one is in response to the whole question of poverty being the mother of crime, as the Roman emperor said. And in my work that I currently do, I work in some of the most poorest, desperate communities that we have in Saskatchewan. And I'm here to say, and willing to say it to anybody that will listen to me, that we don't have to go to a third world country to see third world conditions. I invite you to go to some of the northern communities and see the desperation, because it's there. And poverty does beget crime. Some of the communities in the north, and one, my colleague and I worked with just not too long ago in a rash of suicides of young people there, where actually 6 young people committed suicide within a course of about 18 months. Now this is a population just slightly over 1,200. That's desperation. What drove those kids to do that? Well, there was bullying in the schools. What drove the kids to bully? Well, there was alcoholism and desperation in the homes. What drove to the alcoholism? No jobs. In that particular community, You could count the jobs on your two hands. And there's 1,200 people living there. And I've heard people say, well, what we've got to do is just bring all those northern people south. And I thought, how totally ridiculous and ludicrous. And my response to one was, and it wasn't very welcomed, now this was a number of years ago when I was younger and not as, well, I can run faster scared, but not anymore. My response was yes, and I'm sure everybody in the city of Regina and Saskatoon will welcome them with open arms. These poor people from isolated communities that dress different, look different, walk different, talk different, have a different worldview than any of us may have in the South. So when I look at crime, and I become so frightened with some of our policy thrusts today of getting tough on crime, and I agree with the point you made that, in fact, because a high percentage of the prison population is already Aboriginal, we can really count on the tougher crime sanctions impacting even more on Aboriginal communities. And I think of these poverty-stricken communities with absolute no hope. And what will happen to them was the steady migration of their youth into the prison system, where the only way out of town is to commit an offense. And I mean that literally, because you can't leave those towns because there's no public transportation. We don't have bus services in the north. If there's a victim in a child abuse or a domestic violence situation, she or the person that's been victimized have to wait for the goodwill of the police or a neighbor that can afford it, that has a car, to get them out of town, because there's no other way. And then, of course, some of the communities are fly-in. So, know any poor people that can charter a plane? So the desperation we have in our province is very real. When we look at the crime stats of northern Saskatchewan, we look at them in Regina, we all know that we have the highest crime rate in Saskatchewan. But guess what? The crime rate in northern Saskatchewan is 4 times that of the city of Regina, and that's the reality. So the highest crime rate really in the Western world is northern Saskatchewan. And it's crime against, it's the criminalization of poverty, it's the criminalization of desperation and hopelessness. Because these kids have nowhere to turn. And we're not there for them. And by that I mean we, society at large, whether it's me living in my comfortable home in the city of Regina, or my neighbor, or a service provider in government, or whatever, we're really not there for those kids. We don't see them. We don't experience their lives for 24 hours a day, day in, day out, year in, year out, where you grow up knowing there's no hope. You can't even imagine a career. And you don't even know you have a right to a career. I remember one kid, we tried promoting jobs inside the Ministry of Justice. And we looked at court clerks and all these different ones. And so we had this one little presentation done in, I believe the school was in L'Orange. And this little kid comes up to one of the people handling the information booth, and she said, do lawyers go to hell? And she said, well, I don't know. She says, well, they're really not very nice people. They must. So that's what we're up against as a Saskatchewan society. That's the challenge that everybody in here and everybody out there in the comforts of their homes or in their poverty or in their horror have to address, is how do we reach that community and give them hope? I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Bonnie?
I just want to make one response. Good to see you again, but that's not it. You were talking about trying to get employment. people who are on social assistance, they're usually criminalized before they've even committed a crime. A lot of people I work with will phone me and ask if they can use me as a reference when they're applying for a job. And I know, without them even telling me, that they don't want it to be identified that they're on social services. Because as soon as they are, they've lost the job. Because they automatically assume that if you're on welfare, you're poor, that there's something wrong with you, that you're a criminal element. So when I give a reference for somebody, I just say I've worked with them. I don't have to say I was their advocate. But if they get the impression that I worked with this individual, then they have a chance of getting that job. But in many of the places of employment across this province, if you identify when they say, are you working now? And most people's response would be, no, I'm on assistance. They don't get the job. So they're criminalized before they even commit a criminal act.
Just the one thing I wanted to follow up on, and I don't know if we're going to disagree or not, but Niels Christie in 1969 wrote an article in 1979, wrote an article in the British Journal of Criminology, and he talked about how we've professionalized crime, right? Police officers, courts, lawyers, judges, so on and so forth. He chose to sort of frame it in crime as ask the question of who owns the conflict, and think of conflict as property, if you want to conceptualize it that way. And then who then needs to sort of fix it. I think I hear over and over again from professionals, whether talking to police officers or probation officers or social workers or whatever it happens to be, how do we fix it? How do we do it? Well, you know what? It's not your problem. Right? We need to provide the resources that the community needs to support what their solutions are, and stop judging them as to whether or not they're spending $1 in this column or that column. And if they choose to throw it away, that's their choice, right? One of the things we do with crime, and other things that we don't like to look at, is we isolate it, right? I mean, it's not by coincidence that the jail's out by the dump. It's not by coincidence that the North Battleford Mental Hospital is where it is. It was designed that way, initially with some good thought, right? Peace and tranquility, you know, of course, but then we overpopulated it to the point where it was totally unmanageable. It's the same thing, you know, with crime and violence, right? We first have to make the person that we commit the act against different from us. You're black, you're white, you're brown, you're tall, you're short, you're a woman, you're not a man. And then I can hurt you because you're not me. As soon as I have some sense that you're like me, then there's a less chance of me hurting you. And I think that's in part where the relationships come in, and where we need to sort of begin to rebuild how we frame our problems. I think language has a lot to do with how we have that discourse. So, yeah, just a thought about the whole sort of professionalization of it, right?
If you guys don't mind, I'm going to jump into, this is just commenting a little bit on what Hirsch said also, with the who owns that crime. And I think part of what RAMP does, and other alternative measures programs and extrajudicial programs does, is allows people to, again, take ownership of their conflict. When you go into court and when you're facing a judge, you're generally encouraged to lie and deny as much as possible, because, you know, the more you admit to, then the more you're going to be punished with. So you hire a lawyer so that you can hopefully admit to as little as possible. Anyways, through this process, outside of the court system, you're actually encouraged to own up to what it is that you've done and accept responsibility, and then therefore you can show the community how it is that you want to be accountable. And as I mentioned before too, in the court system there is no space for the victim to be a part of that, or for them to have any ownership on the conflict, over that conflict either. It really does become, as Hirsch said, we serve it up to the professionals. So again, through this process, there's an invitation out there, at least, to the victim to have a say in what should happen or what they would like to see happen. And also, the gentleman at the front here was commenting on soliciting charges as well as drug-related charges, and that's something that also can be dealt with through alternative measures as opposed to going through the court system. And I don't think I clarified earlier, but I will clarify that if the client goes through the program and completes the agreement that they came up with in conjunction with the victim, then the benefit to them and ultimately to the community, I think, is that the charge is withdrawn from their record. So they get a second chance at having a clean record, therefore a better footing, I would imagine, to go to school or to get a job or to hang on to their children, whatever the case may be. So that's another thing that I hadn't really clarified earlier too, is that not only is it an alternative to the justice system, but it's in many ways a really good thing for those people.
What happens, I just got to ask a question, Ashley. What happens if the same person comes by again, a second? Are they allowed to use this program a second time?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's something also that we can comment on, was the recidivism rates that you had mentioned earlier. Going through this process, like in my year or so experience, I haven't seen a client back again for the same charge. The only reason I will see them back is if we've been working with them, they failed their agreement for whatever reason, they lost touch, they moved or whatever, and then they've been re-referred in the court for that same charge. They have a second chance at kind of finishing what they started. We have official kind of criteria. You shouldn't come back on the twice within 6 months or something like that, but generally you look at why it was that they failed, and then go from there.
Just a quick comment on the prostitution thing, and it goes back to my comment earlier about communities owning it. I often wonder what would happen if only the women in Parliament were allowed to vote on laws affecting prostitution, if the laws would be any different than they currently are. Oh, I bet you they would be.
I'd like to think they would be.
Yeah.
Prostitution is not the oldest trade, begging for it is.
That's a good question. I think a couple of things, and I don't want to take it away from the main theme, because to me it all falls back into to the goal of this forum tonight. From my experience as an Aboriginal person working in justice and working with a number of Aboriginal communities across the province and indeed across Canada, is that the relationship between the criminal justice system and Aboriginal communities across this country, bar none, is extremely strained, and that's putting it politely. For the main part, we fear the criminal justice system. We fear the police, we fear the judge, we fear the prosecutor, we fear the jailer. We fear anybody that comes even remotely connected to justice says, "Hi, I'm here to help you." Because we know that usually means incarceration. Or we know it means you're going to take away our traditional laws. Or you're going to take away our language. Or you're going to take away our kids. And it goes on and on. I mean, this is the history of the relationship that Aboriginal people have had with Canadian justice system. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, unfortunately for the RCMP, they were the people or the authority within government charged with the responsibility of enforcing these laws in history. So indeed the relationship and view we have of the police is very dim. So a huge challenge, and this is where I come back to what I was saying earlier, Hirsch, I don't think government should solve their problem, or society in Regina, but I do think we have individual responsibilities to try and bridge that gap. And befriend and find something in common with our northern neighbors. Because what will happen is, this is the way I put it, in some ways, in some of the communities, they're so angry, they're so desperate, and it goes on, the history goes on and on. If you look at the northern village of Sandy Bay, it was a town created because they built the dam, because the power companies started, because they were moving white people up north to work on the jobs, because they couldn't rely on the native folk, and because the native folk lived in the shacks across the river, and the white folks lived on an island that had a golf course, and they had running water and paved streets and electricity, but the people in the other community didn't. And then they shut down the plant because they made it automated, and all the white people went away, and just the Aboriginal people were left there, having been pulled from their traditional areas, and there's no jobs. So is there anger? Yes. Deep anger, deep resentment. Visit with those people in those communities. Somebody will always come and tell you the story of Paradise Island, where Aboriginal people weren't allowed. The gates were locked at 8 o'clock at night. That's where they're stuck. So when our kids, say I lived there and I had a young boy and he wanted to be a lawyer, a daughter, said, yeah, I'm going to grow up and be a prosecutor. Well, yes, they would be interested. But you know, you've got to remember too that in some of these communities they don't like the medical profession either, because the medical profession diagnosed them as having a learning disability. When in fact what it might be is that they're culturally 1,000 miles apart from each other from their views of the world. It's not a learning disability at all, it's a worldview. So the power that government, regardless of who, whether it's health, justice, doesn't matter, education, a university, the power we have of that community to demoralize it further or build it up is immense. So these young people don't even know they have the right. I was sitting here and I was listening to the presentations and I was wondering how many people I know in northern communities, and I know some very bright, capable people, but how many of them would feel comfortable coming to this university and participating in a forum and voicing their opinion? See, I see shakes. No one. Fear. What will all these educated people say? They might throw us out. That's the bridge that you and I have to jump to make that person want to come and tell us their opinion, share their solutions. Excellent solutions. Sandy Bay had some very good solutions for their problem. And it took my colleague and I and a few other colleagues all our time to keep government from interfering. Now, yes, we wanted them involved. We just didn't want them to own it. And so it's constant work. And that's a mind shift that those of us in the South and those of us from other cultures need to make. I hope that answers. I don't know if it does or not. But for kids, yes, they would love to, but they don't know what it is. We have to reach them. We have to reach them.
Thank you. Rob?
Well, I've got so many questions because I've learned so much tonight. I really don't know anything about the whole area of justice. Even though I'm Caroline's brother, I remain fairly ignorant about these things. But it's encouraging to hear that there are so many good ideas about how we can solve some of these problems. But I've got a utilitarian question. If someone, say, breaks into my house, and can I ask for this alternative measures thing to be put in place and not get charged in the regular system? Like, is that within my rights to ask for that?
Well, I think that's a good question. I don't think it happens as often because people just don't know that this process is available. If police become involved in the situation, they are aware of the program, and they are able, on their discretion, to send or to refer that charge to a program like RAMP before it goes to the court system. That's called a pre-charge. So they could, if they're involved with youth or adults who've committed that crime, and they are able to sit down with them and talk to them about it and say, hey, you have an option here. We can send this to the justice system, the court system, and it'll go through as the way it traditionally does. Or if you are accepting responsibility for this B&E or theft, and you're ready to speak to that, you can go to the RAMP program. So they can give them an option at that point.
But for him to suggest it would be good.
I think, yeah, exactly.
Like if
the thing is just there's not an awareness out there that the process is available.
So it sounds like, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot on the legalistic details here, but it sounds like it's the discretion of the officer involved. It's not my discretion.
The severity of what happens.
In our system, the police decide. It's the police discretion to charge.
Yeah.
You know, compared to the Americans, where it's the prosecutor or the district attorney.
So, do you think it would be helpful if I asked the police, you know, even before they say they don't have anybody, if a crime is committed against me, if I ask them, well, you know, I would like, if you find whoever's involved, to do this alternative measures thing. If people were aware of that, I wonder if that would help, and then they could make more of a demand for that. You know, like our society, you know, make a demand for something, you start to get more response. So, do you think that would be helpful?
There is some exclusionary criteria. Like, it depends. There's different levels of severity. So I guess it's kind of up to the RCMP officer, but say there's violence or some sexual activity that have taken place, then that will go straight to court. But I'm thinking you're talking about...
If it's a property crime, those are the most common ones.
If it's just straight property crime, I'm sure you can make a suggestion, and it depends on how democratic the officer is, then I'm sure you could make a suggestion.
But wouldn't that be the best way of doing justice, that is determined by those who are actually involved, right? Like, as a victim?
Yeah, it would, like, we had, during that auto crime wave, we had 2 cars stolen, and I would have liked to have met the person who stole the cars. And it wasn't, we had the oldest cars in the city almost, so it wasn't like they were really valuable. But it was just that it was a sense of violation, right? They broke into the car, and I kind of liked the car, and they drove off with it someplace. And so I would have liked, it was no satisfaction to me if somebody goes to jail. I mean, I'd like to meet them and find some kind of compensation that's relevant to me. It's as opposed to paying a whole bunch of money in my pocket to keep a jail going. That's what I like about some of the things you're saying. Is I don't like the idea of just a selfish way of footing the bill for all this kind of high cost punishment. Another question I had was a question of curiosity, really. Do you think, is there some kind of prevailing social atmosphere right now about people getting involved in issues, et cetera, that's generating a lot of apathy around questions like this issue of justice and change in it? Do you think is there a situation we have in our society where people are just apathetic and they don't want to hear any bad news, or is this? I have this sort of feeling that it's sort of like that in it. And I wonder, what's your sense of that? Is there an untapped reserve of goodwill and people wanting to get involved, but they just don't know how in this kind of issue?
One of the conditions I alluded to when I was speaking during my presentation was the need for public education. That if we're going to change how we frame the questions, then we need to be sure that the public has the information they need to make an informed decision. Because I think at the end of the day, we all, regardless of our profession or whether we're just a citizen, we all want safer communities, right? The issue is how we get at it. So let's look at what's working and what's not, and begin, I think, seeing things in proportion. I mean, you're more likely to get hurt in a car accident than you are to get shot by a gang member, right? Like, but we don't see the, well, I guess we do in part, the number of car accidents, but we don't hear a lot of laws sort of call for getting tougher on driving offenses. But I guess there was one this week, so. But you get my general drift is that the media is so enthralled with this idea of gangs. And people do get hurt. I mean, there's no question. Innocent people get hurt that had nothing to do with it, just drive-by shootings. Yeah. I mean, these guys aren't good aims, right? They miss, and they hurt people in the process. Those things, I think need to be balanced, but I think we're way out of whack on the suppression side and not enough on the prevention and intervention side.
So how can that news get out there then, do you think? What?
Well, I think forums like this are a beginning, talk to your friends. CBC called, they want me to speak on the radio tomorrow. We just need to keep the dialogue going.
Gormley. Thank you.
I think I just had one more point I wanted to elaborate on. You were asking, like, how do people find out about this, or what do people learn from this? And I think if they understand that, like, doing a mediation, like between a victim and an offender, or doing a community justice forum where there's a member of the community, there's an elder there it's designed to let the person know that what you did affected somebody. And I guess you can get someone who got their second or third B&E charge, and you say, like, go to court. Well, the court is so congested that who knows, you might get 2 years probation or something, and that person knows that they'll stand there. Okay, I'll go to court. I'll get up at 9 o'clock and go to court. So if you have somebody who has to think about what they did, what are they going to say during this forum that's going to take place? Like, people are going to ask me a question. The court doesn't ask me any questions. They just say, this is what you did, this is what the police report says, this is what you're getting. You get a fine, whatever it may be. So a lot of what we do, it's harder for an offender to live with the fact, knowing that he's going to meet up with the victim. In the best possible case scenario, yes, you'll meet up with the victim and hear how his actions affected the actions of other people. Like, I've seen kids standing in the courtroom box, like, they don't care, they're waving at their friends. They stand up in court maybe if they get their sentence, and they don't care, they leave, no intention. But coming through our program, or RAMP, there's responsibility. You are going to go through this, or else you're going to go back to court and get charges. So, like, to see some kid, every time you see him, so what's going to happen? What do I have to say? And I said, you have to tell your story, tell your feelings. You have to listen to what people are going to say. And that's hard for them. Like, for them to show up, and they're sitting in their chair, they're jittery, they're shaking, their voices are shaking, you can tell they're going to cry. Or break down or something, and like something like that makes a person take responsibility. It's a lot harder to go through something like alternative measures than to go to court and someone says, 3 months, sign this, you're gone. So it's like, to get that message out for somebody to come and witness something like that's very valuable to what we do. Like, that's why we're here, is to kind of tell stories like that and what kind of impact we have on people's lives. So hopefully.
I just wanted to comment. Part of the apathy thing too is what Hirsch was alluding to, the misconception of what the justice system can actually do for you, or like when you get victims on the other end of the line and they're saying, well, why aren't they in jail? And well, first of all, most of our referrals are, the Crown is sending them to us because they aren't seeking jail time. And it's really kind of what Hirsch was saying, you need to educate the public, the victims, the community on what's really feasible by our justice system, and a lot of times it's their idea of what it is completely wrong and completely misinformed. I should be getting $500, $1,000 in pain and suffering. Well, that's civil, and it's also, that's TV and that's media, and it's and then also to just go a step further and explore, okay, so why do you want them to go to jail? Like, what purpose would that serve? And a lot of times it's interesting because they're not even really sure. Well, you want them to have a criminal record? Okay, so how is that going to help the community at large when they're stuck with this criminal record for a theft under 5,000 charge, and they cannot get the job at McDonald's even, because every place is giving criminal records checks. So I was wondering too who's going to show up, because I kind of get the sense too that there is a lot of apathy. Like every politician, or there isn't going to be a politician who runs a campaign based on being soft on crime, right? It's like, it's the catchy macho way of running a campaign. We're going to be tough on crime. So then you hear it, the rant come up again, and you roll your eyes, and it's just that misconception of things are getting worse and there's nothing we can do. So it's just, I think foremost the answer is just education and really making people aware of what the justice system can provide, and then what we can do as a community, more importantly.
But I take it beyond just the education. We can educate all the population we want, but the government is still going to do what they want. So I think we need to also be going to the government and saying, we don't support what you're doing. One handwritten letter, they see that like 700 votes. Don't underestimate the power of you and a pen and putting your thoughts, your wishes down on it. They don't hear enough from this side. They hear from the side that wants to crucify people, that would love to bring back the death penalty. They don't hear very much from the side that wants to look at other alternatives. Ask them to put the funding that they would be putting into longer prison sentences. Ask them to put it into programs like RAMP. Ask them to put it into programs within communities that can create things that prevent children or adults, as far as that goes, from going out and committing crimes. So put the money back into our communities and allow us to be able to develop what's needed for us to try to stave off some of the criminal action. But each and every one of us have a responsibility. I'm a firm believer in my political responsibility doesn't begin and end with a check mark once every 4 years on a ballot. It begins the day those buggers are elected. And unelected. And elected.
Just drawing on from what Ashley was talking about, I don't think it's a big surprise when we hear the notions of tough on crime. I hate to say it, but I think for a lot of people it does make sense, because the way our justice system determines satisfaction for a victim is by a sentence. And the only way that you can actually get satisfaction is to get a tougher sentence. So, I mean, I don't think it's a big shock when people are calling for mandatory minimums. I don't think it's a big shock when the communities are screaming and the victims are going, well, we want tougher sentences. And I think politicians are obviously going to jump on that. And I think Ilse talked about it right at the start of her talk, in that we become conditioned to that model. We are conditioned to a retributive model. And as Ashley pointed out, we're not educated on the other options that are out there. I think Paul McCold said it well, that crime creates harm, that creates needs that require a response. And the only response available that most people know about is a retributive response. And they're not getting the satisfaction that they need within the court, so they call for a tougher sentence. I think you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about education programs and getting the word out there with what these other programs are, getting the conflict back in the hands of the people who do own it and letting them experience what's going on. But I think until we see, as Howard Zayer talked about, the paradigm shift away from a retributive model, I don't think we should stand here surprised that people are talking about getting tough on crime. If the only way I'm going to get satisfaction is a harsher sentence, I'm going to call for it. I just don't think that that's a big shock. But I think there needs to be, as Zayer talks about, a paradigm shift. And that's got to start somewhere, and it's got to start with educating the communities as to what else is out there. I've worked with offenders. I teach in the Justice Studies Department here. I'm a proponent of restorative justice. I don't believe it's a panacea to fix everything. As much as I'm a proponent, I'm also a critic, because I think that's how you create healthier programs. But I think we need to engage in a process where we can talk about this paradigm shift in much more concrete terms. I think Howard Zayer talks about it very nicely, but what does it look like in practice? And how do we get this word out? How do we get people to start looking for something new? And until we do, I think we're going to see a continued call for tough on crime.
I don't think, I mean, I think your observation is accurate, but I think underlying it is a couple of things. When they did the general public survey and asked for people's satisfaction with the criminal justice system, most people in most regions of Canada really like what the police do. Right, and I was trying to look for the stats, I just don't have them right with me. But I think that at the lowest end it was like 62%, and there was others in the higher end rural communities, 80%. Really like police stuff. When they asked them if they liked what the correctional system did, the courts, the Crown prosecutors, the jails, that's when they didn't like it. And if you start probing underneath why, and Jennifer Tuff did this, what she found was because they didn't have a say. And when they don't have a say, then they want their gut reaction. Somebody mentioned, I've been violated, I need that fixed, right? And if I don't have any control of it, then my sense is the harsher the better, right? So when victims start getting involved, their satisfaction rate within the restorative justice system is amazing. They really like that process. So I think your observation is accurate, but when we start drilling down to, there's inherent conflict in how the public perceive things. It depends on the question you ask them.
Thanks, Hirsch. I think Rick's got a question, and I think that'll be our last question for the night.
For the last, first I want to thank you for coming to speak here on this justice system, and also want to thank the elder for coming to do the prayer. You know, prior to contact 130 some years ago, we had a good system in place in this beautiful country, in this especially Treaty 4 territory. We had our own systems in place. Those systems have been attacked, and a society has suffered for the last 130 some years here in this Treaty 4 territory. And now those young people are starting to rebel against a system that attacked them and made them suffer. You know, and we had our institutes in place prior to contact. We had our own justice system. We call it Bagwe Smogamik. You know, and we had our own policing system in place. Usapaschikan. We had our medicine people in place. You know, and all those have been attacked. You know, and a lot of our young kids are grasping and wanting to belong, and they've been searching for something to belong to. And I hear people talk all the time about, you know, how are we going to help them? You know, and I sometimes get frustrated, you know, and I think, you know, this is 2009. We're supposed to be an evolving society, people with open minds. And how many people have ever been to an Usapaschikan? How many people have ever been to Bagwe Smogamik? How many people have ever been to Matutsan, Wagniganigamik? You know, and we had those systems in place prior to contact. And those have been taken away from our people. And it went underground. There's only a few people that study those institutes that were given to us by the Creator. You know, and I, you know, sometimes I get just flabbergasted, you know, just blown away by people, you know, when they come and talk to me and they say, you know, can you bring an elder to come and speak for us, to come and pray for us, you know, for our gathering. And I asked them, well, you know, what linguistic group do you want them to, you know, do you want, you know, what gender, male or female? What institute do you want this professional, the people we now call elders, these people who have studied an institute for 30, 40 years of their life, you know, that was given to us by the Creator, you know, to speak on behalf of these young kids that's giving society a problem. You know, and You know, it blows me away. You know, and when we talk about justice, you know, we have our justice systems out there, and our young kids have been pulled away from those institutes. You know, there's a lot of us that are struggling hard to try to bring those young people back to our own systems. And when we finally do bring those young children back to those institutes that were given to us by the Creator, you wouldn't believe the turnaround on those young people. You know, so maybe you guys have to get educated a little bit more. You know, open up your minds a little bit more. Open up your hearts a little bit more. Instead of talking, you know, go out there and participate. For 130 some years in this territory, our people have been saying, welcome. Come, we'll show you how to live. But no, you know, it hasn't been done. You know, and it's still, you know, and it blows me away. This is 2009. You know, and people still don't understand this. People still want to put us in their own institutes. We weren't given that as human beings on this part of the world. The Creator put us down here and give us ways to believe and understand. And still people can't understand us because they haven't come to us. You know, they try to pull us and put us over here. And we don't, you know, there's always that struggle. There's always that, you know, lack of understanding.
Thank you. Where is the what? Sign up form. Oh, sorry. Yes, I'll put that out. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. So thank you. Especially thank the panelists for coming tonight, and thank all of you. And Elder Agnes Littletent is going to give a closing prayer, and thank you, Elder.
I want to say it's been so nice to hear all this evening, and a very I thank Ricky for saying what he said, which is very true. We believe in our culture, and if we had our kids and our families believe in this way, what we had learned before, long time ago, and the way we were brought up in our culture ways, and so much of this it wasn't taught like this, what's it called? Our ceremonies and all these things. If you really believe in it, it really helps. It really helps. And I'm just very sorry my native people, they don't, I don't know where they're lost somewhere. And if they could go back and think about these things, I think they will be helped, and they'll be away from those jail sentences they're getting and all that. And it's very, if you have a strong belief in your culture, it really helps, because I very strongly believe in my own culture. where said I had a boy that passed away on the 29th of December. He never drank, and I asked the elders why, and they told me that he had finished his job here, and he left, and he never looked back. And I thought I was never going to be happy in this world till the rest of my life. But, you know, with all that help I heard from them when I asked that question, am I going to be ever, I thought I was never going to be happy. And they told me he was happy out there where he was. When he left. He never looked back because he had finished his job here. He was a good person, and he's very happy with his grandparents out there and his father. And I said, why can't we be happy here? His relatives, his nieces, brothers, sisters, relatives, and he had worked at the school for 15 years, and he loved the kids, he loved his friends, he always had good words for them. They all stood together, and this is what made me feel happy. I asked the elders, I want to be happy, me too. If he's happy out there, we want to be happy. All his relatives, his aunties, his nieces, I was very sorry for him. And we want to be happy like that. You know, believing this, our culture like that, I'm able to stand here and talk. Because before that, I never thought I was ever going to. I couldn't speak to my own family, my own sisters. I was choked. I couldn't talk to them. When somebody talked to me already, I wanted to cry. And I asked the elders to pray for me like that. And if everybody believe in their culture, all these sacred things that we were given, I think it would have been different. It's going to be different. But this is what I always feel so, I think of it, I think a lot of it. We should, I always wish they would believe in their culture, how we were native people, and we should be able to follow our ways. Like the Bagway Samoan, I mean, this Matutsana, that's where we were. That's where we get our strong minds from. So that's all I'm going to say for a while, and then we'll have a closing prayer. I thank you all for listening, and I thank all these, and I hear them talking. You just reminded me of all these things, what they said, and I thank you all. I'll pray now. Gagis mo tawag seman to mam tawi mau nuskap mo takab mamu apia min tawaya ke min tawaya ko ko ke kap ni kani samagi tsik we are msnai gane donek sketa hik ko mina nasku teni ko ke me nasku mo yan nasku mo those days some more hik mina kamamu ka pawisik ya ves Kan si tohta ki. Kan si tohta ma se mandu ma mutawi ma ga se wa sin. Kamu ka po ya. Ka sawe mi ya. Awasime e simi asiki wai. Kamta wai na ma ko usia mes kano. Kamta wai na ma ko usia na ka tu e chikan kamamu ka po ya. E tatuanak sinna e ai sinu e tatuit. Kamamu ka po it. E kusan magisi iti magi na uya. Kagis mo tatata kasi mantu mamutawi magsiwatsin. Nitas kami kapmayat snapewinyo kamaminas tamoy ngagisi mo. E kusan misi kagis mo tatata. Oh. Oh.
Thank you, Agnes. And thank you once again to the panel for coming out, and thank you, a small but mighty crowd tonight, for your participation. Thank you.
And if anyone is interested in learning a bit more about the RAM program, I have a few pamphlets here I can give you, and any questions I can help you with.
And actually, we've got a new poster that CAFES has just produced. So there's a few copies up here if you'd like to take some for yourself.
We'll put up the sheet here too if you want to sign it for more information.